Welcome to the Washington Association of Accountants and Tax Preparers August 26th Accounting Seminar. We have two amazing Excel topics. We're going to talk all about lookup formulas. Here's 10 unbelievable topics about lookup formulas. And then over in a separate workbook, we're going to talk all about pivot tables. So really, this accounting seminar is all about lookup formulas and pivot tables, perhaps the most important topics for accountants. Hey, if you want to download the files and follow along, these are the 5 files. There's a lookup formula start and finish, and then a pivot tables finished and start file, and there's even some PDF notes. If you click on the link below the video, go all the way down to the bottom in the other section and look for the WAAT section, and these files are available for download. Hey, we're going to start off with lookup formulas. And here's our 10 examples. And we're actually going to see a bunch of different lookup functions. We'll talk about VLOOKUP, match, index, choose, lookup function, and even a few more. Now, here's our list of topics. And we're going to start out with example number 1. We're going to click on this sheet right here. And in example number 1, we're going to learn about data validation list, the VLOOKUP function using exact match, and even the if and ISBLANK functions with our goal of creating an invoice. Here's our template for our invoice, and here's our lookup table. Now, the lookup table has product name. In this case, we're selling boomerangs, the part number, the flight of the boomerang, and the price. Down in this invoice, for each one of our rows, we're going to have to look up a particular price. And we're using VLOOKUP. V is for vertical. Notice this is a vertical table. So if I'm looking up quad, I'm going to try and find a match in the first column. And then if I'm trying to retrieve a price, I need to go over 1, 2, 3 to the 4th column, get that price, and bring it back. We will actually see many different types of lookup formulas. But in all cases, when you're looking something up, you're trying to look at something, find a match, and then go and get something and bring it back. All right, let's first talk about data validation list. Now, what I would like is instead of having to type the product name here and risk misspelling the product name, I'd like a little drop-down list. Now, anytime you have a lookup table, and here we have a lookup table with 4 columns, and you already have the product names in the first column, we can simply tell each one of these cells to look at the first column using data validation list, and there will automatically be a drop-down with each one of the product names. All right, we're going to highlight all the cells in our invoice where we get our product name. We go up to the Data ribbon tab, over to Data Tools, and we can click Data Validation. Now, by default, we allow any value in any cell, and all spreadsheets come that way. We're, of course, allowed to put anything, but we can limit what goes into a cell. There's all sorts of amazing options for limiting what goes in a cell, but we want list. Now we come down to Source. We see that collapse button. That means I'm allowed to connect this text box to the cell somewhere in our spreadsheet. I'm simply going to highlight that first column of the lookup table. And now, data validation, when I click OK, will give us a drop down. Look at that. I can select any particular product. So oftentimes when we're doing lookup of product names or employee names, it's convenient to have data validation. Then when we go to do our VLOOKUP, we have a smaller risk of getting an error with our formula because we've validated the data that goes into that cell. All right, so our goal is in this column to look up price. Well, guess what? We're going to type an equal sign and then VL. And notice we have a drop down. All you have to do is type VL, and when you see it in blue, you can hit Tab, and it automatically puts VLOOKUP in. Now, VLOOKUP has 4 arguments. The first argument is what do you want to look up? So I'm going to click on the product name. That's a relative cell reference. As I copy this formula down, it will automatically move to the next product. There's our lookup value. That's in essence telling lookup, remember Bellen, comma, and then we need to tell VLOOKUP where the table is to go try and find a match for Belen. Now it says table array, so that always reminds you of the word table. That says, hey, please highlight the entire table, all the columns. Now I need to lock that range, so I hit the F4 key to put the dollar signs in. That means as I copy the formula down, that table will not move, comma. Well, if we're going to have VLOOKUP go look something up in a table, we need to tell it either column 1, 2, 3, or 4 has the thing I want to go and get and bring back to the cell. So column index number, and I always remember it says column, that's the column number. So I'm simply going to tell VLOOKUP, please go get whatever's in the 4th column, in our case, price, comma. And then we have an option because VLOOKUP can do 2 different types of lookups. We're either going to, in our case, use exact match. That means we're looking up some exact product name, employee name, part number. Or, as we'll see later, you can do approximate match. That's for taxes, commission rates, and other type of approximate lookup. So we're going to select exact match. Now, why the word false and true? It's not really the normal way we think of false and true as in a logical test. It just tells VLOOKUP what type of lookup to do. Now, actually, you can double click false, or as we'll see later, if you're doing approximate, you can double click true. But you can also put a 0 for false or a 1 for true. I'm always going to put a 0 for false. And the reason why is there are other lookup functions that do exact match and approximate match. And in those functions, they use a 0. So I'm always using a 0 so I'm consistent. Anytime I'm doing a lookup function and I'm doing exact match, I put a 0. That's it. Our 4 arguments are entered, close parentheses, Control Enter. That is amazing. It got 26.95. If I come over here and select Majestic Butte, instantly the formula updates. It went over, it found a match in the first column. It went over to the 4th column. It got 31.95 and brought it back to the cell. Now I'm going to copy this down. I'm going to point to the little fill handle in the lower right-hand corner. And when I see my black crosshair or angry rabbit, I click and drag. And just like that, I get the correct prices. Oh, wait a second. What's NA mean? Well, if you put this cell in edit mode with F2, you can see it's looking at an empty cell. Now, actually, Excel evaluates an empty cell to 0. So it's actually trying to match a 0 here, and it can't find one. So it's polite. It says not available. Now, there's a bunch of different ways we can deal with an NA error. One way is in Excel 2013 or later, there's an if NA, which you just simply have your VLOOKUP. And if NA senses an NA, it then puts whatever you have in the second argument in the cell. In this case, we have double quote, which is a 0-length text string which displays nothing. That's a fine formula. In earlier versions, when we didn't have if NA, we could use if error. Then it would find any error that evaluated. It would dump 0-length text string into the cell. But here's a caveat. If you have big spreadsheets with lots of VLOOKUPs, I want you to look down here. The actual formula had to do the lookup. And if you have big lookup tables doing exact match, that means it had to search through huge columns. But notice, in order for if NA to figure out if there was an error, it had to run VLOOKUP. Well, anytime you have an alternative logical test, instead of making the formula run VLOOKUP each time, we can use the if function. Now, our alternative test will be, is the cell empty? Because down here, that's the trigger for us. Empty, empty, empty. I don't want to show anything. So you ready? In front of VLOOKUP, I'm going to say if. And I need a logical test. Our logical test or trigger is the cell empty? There's a special built-in function called ISBLANK. Now, blank sometimes is confusing in terms of a term. If you read the screen tip on this and I backspace, it says checks whether a reference is an empty cell, which is what we want. They should have called this function IsEmpty. I simply click on the relative cell reference. I close this off, and notice my screen tip is polite. Once I close it off, I see now I'm back to the if function. Now I'm going to come to the end after is blank and put a comma. Now if I click on logical test, is blank will just deliver true or false as I copy down. If it's true, then what do I want to put in the cell? Well, that would be down here. I want to put double quote, double quote. That's our method of showing nothing. Otherwise, comma, then please run the VLOOKUP. Now, the efficiency to this, again, is that as the formula is copied down, it runs a simple is blank, which comes out true or false. Down here, it doesn't have to run the VLOOKUP. It simply dumps this zero-length text string into the cell. All right, copy it down. And there we go. Now when I come over here and select Bellen, instantly I get the price. I'm going to Control Z. Now we want to create a formula that will calculate the total price. So I equal sign, I did a left arrow, times left arrow, units. Control Enter, and now I'm going to copy this down. Now, why do we get a value error? Well, it looks like it should be 0 times 0 because these cells evaluate to 0 as Excel evaluates them. But remember, in this cell right here, that is what's in the cell, and it's text. So this formula gives us a value error because we have text times an empty cell or 0, which can't be calculated. So what are we going to do? I'm going to come up with a similar logical test. If, and I'm going to hit Tab, the logical test, I could use is blank, but that checks if it's an empty cell. So I'm simply going to click on the cell, and I'm going to build my own logical test. Are you equal to double quote, comma. There's our logical test. Remember, as I copy this down, when it gets down to these cells, it'll be true. So what do I want in the cell? If it comes out true, double quote, I want to show nothing. Otherwise, run the formula. Close parentheses. Control Enter. And now I'm going to copy this down. And there we have it. And now I can come down to the bottom and use the keyboard for the sum function, Alt equals. And sure enough, it got it right. By the way, sum is specifically programmed to ignore text and not ignore numbers. So that works perfect. Now when I come over here and test this, I'm going to say a sunset, and we're going to buy 12 of those. Enter. And just like that, our invoice is working. That's example 1 for lookup. We saw if is blank and VLOOKUP, and even another if to calculate total for each item bought. Now let's go look at our next example on E2. Now, example number 2, we're going to see how to use VLOOKUP using exact match again. But we're also going to see the left, mid, and search functions, which are text functions, to do partial text lookup. We're also going to learn something really important about data mismatch. And our goal here is to look up product price. Now, sometimes we're not given convenient data. We're given ID. Now, we could break this apart using various features. But in some templates, you have to keep this ID. I still need to look up the price. If my table was set up this way, where the thing I was looking up was the product name, and then I needed to get price, I would need to get the word Bellen, Carlota, Quad. As another example, if our lookup table had the ID to get our price, then we'd have to look up the middle ID numbers. Now, how are we going to do that? Well, we can, inside of our formula, extract just the product name. And then when we're trying to look up in the second table, we'll extract just the middle part of this text, the number ID. Now, how do we do that? Well, we can use the left function to get text from the left. So I'm going to say equals left. And text, we simply click on the whole text, comma. And now number of characters. Well, I'm going to count on my fingers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So if I put a 6, I'm hard coding this in. It'll definitely work, Control Enter for the Bellen. But when I copy down, it's not going to work. Now, the trick to these types of formula is, can we recognize a pattern that's consistent all the way down? And for us, the pattern is definitely consistent. It's get everything before the dash. So in this cell right here, I'm going to show you the search function. Now, the search function simply looks for some text, in our case, double quote dash, double quote. Anytime you put text into a formula, it's got to be in double quotes or Excel won't understand it. That's what we're searching for, comma, within this. Now, search just tells you the position counting from left to right. So for this first example, the dash will be found at the 7th position. For this next example, it'll be found at the 8th, and here it'll be found, I think, at the 5th. Close parentheses, Control Enter. Oh, that's got some formatting, but don't worry about it. So 785. I'm going to delete this for the time and copy this little formula bit here in edit mode, Control C, Escape. And then I'm going to delete that. Come over here, F2, and where we have a 6, a hard-coded number, I'm going to Control V to paste that. So now search, as we saw over in this column, will automatically deliver almost the correct number. And we could try this, Control Enter and copy it down, right? Well, it's one too many. We come back to the top, F2. We have to subtract 1. And that will give us the correct number of characters from the left to extract product name. Control Enter, double click and send it down. Now guess what? That's the lookup value. So when I hit F2, I'm going to have to put both of those functions inside of VLOOKUP. So VL tab, that whole bit is the lookup value. That's the product name. Comma, table, I'm highlighting the table. F4 to lock it because I'm copying it down. I don't want that table to move. Comma. I'm always counting on my fingers. Which column number has the price? 1, 2. And don't look up at the letters up here. It's always the actual table. There's only 2 columns, so price is in the second. So I put a 2, comma, and I'm putting a 0 for exact match 0, close parentheses. And there it is. Control Enter. Double click and send it down. And there we have, for quad, looked up the correct price. I'm going to go to the last cell and hit F2 just to verify all my cell references. And sure enough, it's working correctly. Now let's go ahead and see if we can extract from the middle of this text string the numbers. Well, there's a function called mid tab, and it will, of course, extract something from the middle. We need to give it the text. There's the text. Comma, start number. We need to say where to start. Well, it's supposed to start not at 7 but 8, not at 8 but 9. So I'm going to have to use the search again. S tab, in double quotes, I put a dash, comma, and then within what? Search is looking there. Now, search will deliver the correct starting position. There's our pattern, always the first character after the dash. And guess what? This pattern is easy. It's always 3. Now, we would know our ID system. If it was a variable number, then we'd have to do something else. But here, our system always has 3 digits. So comma, number of characters, I simply can hard code it in. Our rule for when to hard code stuff into formula, if it's something that will not change, we can hard code it in. If it changes, we need to have it in the cells and refer to it with a cell reference. That's actually called Excel's golden rule. Close parentheses, Control Enter. Uh-oh, that's not right. We can see we actually need to amend this. F2, search is starting at the dash, and we need it to start 1 later. So we add 1 plus 1. Control Enter, double click and send it down. Now, normally we just continue on with this and run into the problem, and it would be really confusing. But this is the data mismatch. You should immediately realize that that data is not a real number. Anything that has the default alignment and is aligned to the left is considered text. And in fact, all of these functions, search, left, right, all those kind of functions, always spit out text. So we have a visual cue. Down here, we have a visual cue that this is a number. Numbers are always aligned to the right if we use the default alignment. As an example, if I came over to some other cell and said, hey, that number, are you equal to this number? It's going to give me a false. F2, we could take this one step further. I could double click that C4 and hit the evaluation key F9. It's in double quotes. That's Excel telling you that's text. If I come over here and hit F9, That's Excel telling you it's a real number. I'm going to click Escape. This is a very common problem, whether we have data imported just as data or a formula delivers numbers, but when they're text, they give us trouble. Any math operation on a formula element that's delivering text number will convert it back to a number. We could do times 1, divide by 1, double negative. I'm going to add 0. Whatever the math operation is, it can't change the value, but it's just got to be a math operation. That's it. That'll work. Control-Enter. There's our cue, our visual cue. To the right means numbers. Double-click and send it down. Now I can come up to the top. There's our lookup number. Come to the beginning, VL tab. Our lookup value is that whole mid-search plus 0, comma. There's our table array. I'm going to highlight. F4 to lock it, comma. 1, 2. 2 is the column that has the thing I want to go and get, comma. Exact match, I'm putting a 0, close parentheses. Control-Enter. There's the number formatting. The number formatting is finally matching what we were trying to do, which is to get price. Double-click and send it down. Go to the last cell, F2. That formula is looking good. All right, example number 2. Sometimes we need to look stuff up, and it's only partial text. We saw left and search, and of course here we saw mid-search and add 0 to convert text numbers to actual numbers. All right, let's go to our next example, E3. Now we need to talk about VLOOKUP with approximate match, not exact match, and we're going to talk about cell references for column index numbers. Our goal is to get the rating and commission. So here's our table. Sales amount. Here's some employees and some sales. So we're always going to be looking up for each employee, matching something in the first column, and returning rating, and then returning the actual commission. Now notice I already did a little cool trick here. A 2 and a 3, that means for rating, rating's in the second column. Commission, that's in the third column. So instead of hard coding those numbers in the formula, we'll put them into the cells. All right, we're also going to see mixed cell references here. Now this is the first time we've seen approximate match. And here's a way of thinking how this works. If I'm looking up this 7,598, well, I certainly can't find an exact match. Now, first things first, when we have approximate match, the first column has to be sorted from smallest to biggest. Then what is the lookup function going to do? It's actually going to look this up. And a way of understanding how it works is it'll race down, and when it bumps into the first one bigger, it jumps back. Now, this category actually will include 7,000 and everything all the way up to 10,000, but not including 10,000. That's why you can think of it as for the 68, it's going to look up 68. It races through till it bumps into the first one bigger and jumps back. This category is 0, including 0 all the way up to, but not including 1,000. Now, that's not technically the way it works. Over here to the side, I have a video I made on approximate match and how it works. It actually does a binary search, which is a really fast search. It's how most databases with index and primary keys can look stuff up so quickly. And you can think of it as opposed to exact match, which does a linear search, searching every single one. All right, equals VL tab. Lookup value, it's going to be the actual sales amount. Now, I don't want to have to create a formula in this column and copy it down, and then create a new one and copy it here and down. I want that cell reference B12 to move relatively as I copy down, but when I copy it to the side, because remember, rating and commission paid both need to look at the sales. So when I copy it to the side, it needs to be locked. Well, notice there's a B and a 12. When I copy this direction, I want to prevent the B from moving to C. But when I copy down, I want 12 to move to 13, 14, 15. So watch this. With the cursor flashing, I hit the F4 key once. That puts all the dollar signs in. Then I hit it a second time. That would lock only the row reference. Then I hit it a third time. Now notice if I keep hitting it, this is the merry-go-round key. It toggles through all the cell references. I want to stop on B is locked, but not the 12. Column reference is locked, but not the row reference. Comma. table. There's the whole table. And this one I hit F4 once because I need it locked in all directions, both the letters, which are columns, and the numbers, which are rows. Comma, column index. I'm clicking on the 2. In this column, I need 2. When I copy the formula over, I need commission paid, which is in 3. So notice this is the opposite of this cell reference right here. That's C10. When I copy down, I need to lock on row 10. Notice this is in row 10. So as I copy down, it's locked on C10. But when I copy it to the side, I need the C part of this to move to D. So here I'm going to make sure the cursor is touching the cell reference and hit the F4 key once and twice. Lock row, but not the column. Comma. And this is approximate match. Now, you can put a true, which is perfectly all right. You can put a 1. Remember we talked about 0 is false, 1 is true. Or notice that the screen tip range lookup has square brackets. That means if you know the default, you can leave it out. And the default is approximate match. So I never put that in. It's just I don't need to type that extra stuff because the default for VLOOKUP is approximate match. And that formula will work. Close parentheses, Control Enter. Copy it to the side. Now I'm going to double click and send this down because there's nothing like subtotal like we did in our invoice example. I'm simply going to double click and it automatically sends it down. It knows to stop because there are empty cells here. And I go to the last cell and hit F2, and sure enough, look at that. There's our mixed cell references. There's the right column. That is amazing. That's approximate match. Now, there's another way we can do this because many times you are absolutely not allowed to have the column numbers listed above. So let's go look at example 4. Now, I'm going to delete this right here. Notice that rating is in the second column. Commission is in the third column. Another way to look at this is if I'm looking up the word rating within this range right here, which position is it? The first, second, or third? It's in the second position. So if I'm looking up rating and finding the relative position of that item in this list, it would be 2. The relative position of commission paid within this list is 3 because it is the third item. Guess what? There's a special function that'll be our second lookup function called match. And that's it. If you read this screen tip, returns the relative position of an item in an array or a list. So I'm going to hit Tab. The lookup value. Well, I need to look up this word rating, and that's a relative cell reference as I copy to the side, comma. Lookup array. It is simply a one-way list. For match to work, it cannot be 2 directions. Notice the actual lookup table has rows and columns. Match works either horizontally or vertically, but it's got to be a one-way array because it's trying to find the relative position counting 1, 2, 3 in a list. So F4 to lock it, comma. And look at that. There's 1 for approximate match. They call it less than. 0 for exact match. And this -1 we don't use too often. It would be when this was sorted the other direction and you were trying to bump into the first smaller item. But for us, we're going to put a 0. So I'm putting exact match 0. Close parentheses. And match, when I Control Enter, delivers the relative position. If I drag this to the side, it gives me the relative position. Now, the nice thing about match is if I were to change this to rating, notice now that formula is always looking up whatever I put in that cell. Whatever the name is, it'll always tell me the relative position. Now I'm going to Control Z. Now let's put it all together. I'm going to end up deleting these. I just did those there for us to look at match for the first time. Now I want to put it together in our lookup formula equals VLOOKUP. I'm looking up the sales amount. As I copy to the side, I need it locked, but not when I copy down. So I hit the F4 key 1, 2, 3 times, comma. I would like the table. That's the whole table. I'm going to hit the F4 key, comma, and column index number. So I'm going to say match, look up whatever the name is up here. And that cell reference, as I copy down, needs to be locked. But when I move it to the side, it needs to move to commission. So I hit F4 key 1, 2 times. Lock the 14, but not the C, comma. Lookup array. That's the actual names at the top of the lookup table. And I need to lock that in all directions. So F4, comma, 0, close parentheses. Now, notice that we have put match to find relative position, which really is a column index number for VLOOKUP. All right, I'm going to come to the end, and this is approximate match. So that's the default. I leave that argument out. Close parentheses, Control Enter. I'm going to copy it to the side and double click and send it down. I'm immediately going to go to the diagonally furthest cell away and hit F2 to verify that all of the cell references are working. That is amazing. If I decided I wanted this in a different order next time, I can simply change this to commission paid and this to rating, and instantly it updates. That's the dynamic power of having VLOOKUP and match. All right, that was example 4. Let's go look at example 5. Now, this is one of the more common questions I get. Here's a master customer list. Here's our prospective customers. We've been phoning them. And we want to know which one of the ones in our phone list have made it into the master list. So if I'm looking up Julie's Produce from this list too, can I find it over here? Yes, I can. So in terms of master lists, our phone lists that we've been using, I'm not really interested in Julie anymore. So I want to say something like that's a match. I found it in this list over here. Or true, I found it in this list. Now, the way we think of this is item in list 2 over in list 1? Now, I have to tell you, I work at Highline College, and I get calls every week from all across Highline College, from the president's office down to the staff. And I go across campus and help people with Excel all the time. And this, without a doubt, is the question that I have received more times than any other question in the 13 years I worked at Highline. How do I compare 2 lists? Anytime you think compare 2 lists, we think match function. Remember, match can simply look up an item, comma, and within some list, and I'm going to highlight it and hit the F4 key. And comma, we don't know if the lists are sorted, so I'm pretty much always going to use exact match here. And that's it, because when it finds a match, meaning when it finds Julie position, it's going to give us the relative position. If it can't find it, it delivers an NA. So Control Enter. And watch this, double click and send it down. I'm immediately going to go to the last cell in F2. There it is. Anytime we're asking the question, is the item in list 2 over in list 1, that means we're interested in the numbers. The numbers are what say, yes, that item is in both lists. Now, if we wanted trues and falses instead of numbers and NAs, by the way, people do lots of things. You could actually sort this list right here on this column and get all the NAs together and all the numbers. If you wanted to see trues and falses, then we could simply, since we're interested in the number, we use is number. And there we go. Close parentheses, Control Enter, double click and send it down. Now I'm going to copy this just to show you an example. Is the item not? That's the other type of question, because really when you're comparing 2 lists, you're only asking 2 questions. Is it in both lists, or is the item here not over there? If that's the case, watch this. I'm going to cheat. I'm going to click on that and Control C to copy it. Now I'm going to come over here, equal, Control V, Control Enter. Notice here we're not interested in the number, we're interested in the NA. So of course, F2 instead of is number, we use is NA. Around our match, close parentheses, Control Enter, and we'll get exactly the opposite pattern of trues and falses. So you got to keep in your back pocket when you're comparing 2 lists, match is the function you use. All right, let's go look at example 6. Now in example 6, we're going to see a brand new lookup function called index. And we're going to see how to use index and match functions to do a lookup left. Our goal is given a particular flight range, like 20, we need to match it in the last column and then look up the name of the product in the first column. Now, if we tried to use VLOOKUP, that wouldn't work because VLOOKUP always has to find a match in the first column. And we're trying to find a match in the last column. Well, that brings us to a new lookup function, IN, and there it is, the index function. Now, index is really, with match, the most powerful lookup combination, more powerful than VLOOKUP, because that array, those are actually the values that you want to go and get and bring back to the cell. But that array can be two-way, like VLOOKUP. It can be one-way vertical, or it can be one-way horizontal. So really, with the array argument and index, we can do any type of lookup. Then, and I'm going to delete this, all we need to know is the row number or relative position. And if we have a two-way lookup, we give it the row number and the column number. Now, for us, we're trying to retrieve product. So in the array, I'm going to simply highlight the actual items I want to potentially go and get and bring back to the cell, comma. Now we just need a row number. Now this row number argument is really relative position, because if the array is one way, meaning in our case we have one column and many rows, or if it was the reverse, many columns in one row, then you simply give it relative position in row number. Now relative position, that's easy. We know we can use the match function. I'm going to look up, flying range is 20. Comma, within this range right here, and this is the exact same size with all the same relative positions as we want to potentially look up items over there, comma, and I'm going to use 0 for exact match. We're looking up text, close parentheses, and there it is. So that row number will be delivered by match. Close parentheses, Control Enter, and there it is. If I come over and use my drop down and select, say, 60, instantly there's my weighted majestic butte. So we saw index and match to actually look something up and return something from the first column. Lots of times people refer to that as lookup left. Let's go look at another great example for index and match on example 7. We have some vendors' bids. These are all companies we got bids from. Here's all the different products, product 1, 2, 3, 4. So for this fourth product, our goal is to find the smallest value, and that's the 3265. And then from the column headers at the top, I want to return the vendor's name for each one of the lowest bid. So if I come down here, I actually need to find this 3332 within this range right here, which would give me relative position 1, 2, 3, 4. And then I need index to return this mech aid back to the cell. Now, I've already done the min here to look up the min. That's step 1. But now we can use index and match together to look up the vendor's name for the lowest bid, equals index. And you always want to think of index, that array. Those are the actual items you want to go and get and bring back to the cell. Those are names, so I highlight them. Now, as I copy this formula down, every single cell needs to be locked on the name, so I hit F4, comma. Now I can use row number or relative position. Well, that certainly is a job for the match function. The lookup value, I'm always looking up the lowest bid. Notice I have a helper cell here showing me the min bid, which I want because I want to know what the min bid is. But if I didn't have this, I would actually just put the min function right there. But nevertheless, that cell is going to look up the minimum value, comma, and lookup array. Watch this. It's always going to be the 5 cells to my left as a relative cell reference. And comma. Even though I have numbers here, these are not sorted from smallest to biggest, so I have to use exact match if I want the right answer. 0, close parentheses. That match will deliver the right relative position. In our case, it would be 38.99, so it would be 1, and the formula better deliver crankies. Control Enter. double click and send it down. I go to the last cell, F2, and sure enough, all the cell references are working. That's a great example for index and match as a powerful lookup combination when you have an unusual lookup situation. All right, I'm going to click Escape. Let's go over to Sheet 8 and look at Example 8. All right, Example 8. Our actual last three examples are going to be quite complicated examples, but all three of them are relatively common lookup situations. Example 8, we're going to see how to use VLOOKUP and the choose lookup function to do lookup to multiple tables. Our goal is, here's our data set. We have product and units sold. And I actually need a commission rate. But if I'm looking up units sold for ABC product, I have to use this table right here. If I'm looking up 65 units for EDR to get a commission rate, I have to use this table right here. So this is going to take a few steps. We're still going to use VLOOKUP to look up the units. But inside of VLOOKUP, when we get to the table array argument, we're going to have a separate lookup function called choose that can look up the tables. Further, when we get to choose, it's going to need an index number, either 1 for first table, 2 for second table, or 3 for third table. All right, let's first think about this. We're going to somehow need to assign the number 1, 2, 3. So choose knows which table to look up. Not only that, but we're going to need that number 1, 2, and 3 inside of choose. Well, one way to do this is to have a separate table. Here's the name of these tables, and they have to be in this order, right? ABC, EDR, EDS, and then 1, 2, 3. Then in a separate column, we'll actually look up the product, and from this table get the table number, either 1, 2, or 3. So let's start with that. Equals VLOOKUP, lookup value. I'm looking up relative cell reference product, comma, within this 2-column table, F4 to lock it, comma, and the table number is in the second column, so I put a 2, comma, and that table may or may not be sorted, so I'm using 0 for exact match. Control Enter, and I can double click and send it down. I'll go to the last cell, F2. So I have my table number for each one of my transactions. Now I'm going to start just by showing you the choose function that will allow us to look up tables. But remember, if the choose is looking up a table when it returns it, it can't display it in the cell. But I want to show you the choose before we put it into VLOOKUP. We're going to use choose. And choose really is quite an amazing function because once you somehow give it an index number, you actually put the values you want to look right into the formula. And watch this. For value 1, I'm going to highlight an entire range. I'm going to hit the F4 key. Now think about that. We're looking up a table, but the value arguments get even better. You can put text, numbers, cells, ranges, tables, define names, formulas. Anything that you can possibly have in Excel can go into these values. All right, so there's table 1 for ABC, comma, value 2. Highlight the second one, and F4, comma, value 3. That's our third table. And then I'm going to use the F4 key. And that's it. Close parentheses. When I enter this, it's going to give me a value error because it's not possible to display all those cells. But let's just pick one of these, EDS, F2. I want to highlight this, and I want to evaluate it using the F9 key. And let's check. Here's EDS right here. So it should be in array syntax. Curly brackets house the array. Comma means go over a column. Semicolon means go down a row. So look at this, 0.2, 0.2. Go down a row. That's what semicolon means. 300.03, 300.03. And so on, all the way to the 750 and the 0.05. I'm going to click Escape because once you hard-coded that, I don't want to leave it hard-coded, and that reverts the formula back to whatever you had in the cell before you put it in edit mode. All right, so now just think of that just as a lookup table for VLOOKUP. Now I'm going to do equals VL tab. What am I looking up? Now I'm looking up units. There's the lookup value, comma. And that whole table array now is choose looking at one of three tables. I very carefully come to the end, comma. And each one of these tables, we're going to retrieve from the second column. So column index number, I put a 2. And this is definitely approximate match, so I'm not putting anything for that final argument. Close parentheses. That's pretty cool. VLOOKUP and choose to look up multiple tables. Control Enter, double click and send it down. I'm going to go to the last cell and hit F2. Everything is looking fine. Now, a lot of times when you have a transactional data set like this, you really can't have this extra column here. So watch this, I cheat. We did it in 2 steps as we built it. Now I'm going to copy this in edit mode, Control C, escape. And then I'm going to paste it down here, F2, Control V. Now, notice, double click. That index number is actually looking up there, but what's there? It's a VLOOKUP. So Control Enter. Now I'm going to copy this in edit mode, Control C, escape. Now I come down here, F2, double click, and right where it says index number, I Control V. So now we have a VLOOKUP inside of choose. Then we have choose inside of VLOOKUP. And then finally we have VLOOKUP. Control Enter, copy it down. Go to the last cell, hit F2. It should be working just fine. Now there is another way to look up multiple tables. You can actually use the index function, but the tables have to be on the same sheet. And the advantage of choose is that these ranges can be on this sheet, on another sheet. They can be defined names or whatever. All right, so that's looking at multiple tables with VLOOKUP twice and choose. All right, let's go to another difficult example, yet common task in Excel. Let's go over to example 9. I'm going to close this ribbon to give us some more room. Right-click collapse, or we can use the keyboard Control F1 to collapse. Control F1 is a toggle back and forth for the ribbon. Now I'm going to highlight all of this, and I want to zoom into it. So I'm going to use View, Zoom to Selection, or Alt-WG. All right, here's a tax table. Somebody has earnings, and they're married, and this is the right tax table. In order to find the right row, which will give us the actual tax rate, the tax from the previous bracket, and also for a formula, we're going to need the amount that was already taxed. In order to get the right row, look at what this tax table gives us. The amount has to be over this amount, but not over this amount. For VLOOKUP, that's not going to work because you need a first column where the actual value is included from that value all the way up to the next one, but not including the next one. Well, when you get a table like this, I'm simply going to have to add a column to the beginning, 0 for this one because 0 all the way up to, but including 1,313. Because notice, in order to be at this level right here, you have to be 1 penny above it. So I'm actually going to add 1 penny. I'm going to say equals whatever that limit is plus 0.01. And that way we can have a first column, and then we can do VLOOKUP a bunch of times. So yeah, you get the idea. When they created this table, they weren't thinking that people would be using it in Excel with VLOOKUP. All right, so let's imagine, how do we calculate this amount right here? We have to take this, find the right category. I'm racing down. I find the first bigger one. I jump over here. And in this row, it tells us the rule right here. But we're actually going to have to take the tax from the previous bracket and add to that this amount minus the amount that was already taxed. Take that amount and multiply it by the tax rate. I'm going to do this in 3 steps because guess what? We have to look up the amount already taxed, the tax rate, and this. That means 3 VLOOKUPs. All right, tax from previous bracket equals VL tab. That amount right there, comma, and the table, or we've already created it. And there's our table, comma, and this is the tax from a previous bracket. So we're counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I put a 5. And this is definitely approximate match, so we don't need that last one. Close parentheses. Now I'm actually going to copy this little bit because I'm going to use it over and over. When I hit enter, there it is. That's the correct amount. Tax rate, F2 Control V. Tax rate is 1, 2, 3, 4. So I put a 4 close parentheses. Enter. The amount already taxed, F2 Control V, 1, 2. So I type a 2 close parentheses and enter. Amount to tax in this bracket is simply whatever our total taxable earnings minus amount already taxed. And enter. And finally, now we can get down to our total tax equals tax from previous brackets plus, and I'm actually going to use the round function. When we're multiplying tax rates and things like that, sometimes we can get rounding errors. I don't think we're going to get a rounding error here because I don't see any extraneous percentages passed to the second position. But I'm going to be careful. I'm going to round this. This amount to be taxed in this bracket times my 28%. And I'm rounding to the penny. And I know for taxes, we often round to the dollar. But I'm going to be careful here and calculate this amount. However you want to do it. If you did want to round to the dollar, then it's not 2 to the penny. It's 0 to the ones position. I'm going to put a 2, close parentheses, and there is our amount. We oftentimes don't want to do all this. We want to actually throw it all into a single cell and then type whatever amount here and have that amount delivered with our single cell formula. Now let me show you a great trick. We have our various formula elements that we could, in essence, mash all together. So I'm going to go up to Home, and here's the clipboard. I'm going to click the dialog button for Clipboard, Clear All. Now I'm going to do Tax from Previous Bracket, and I'm going to copy this in Edit Mode. There it is. I might even widen it so I can see that 5. That'll help me construct it in the right way later. All right, let's get our VLOOKUP for tax rate, Control C. There it is. Amount already taxed, Control C. So I have my 3 VLOOKUPs. Now I'm going to try to do it all in one formula. Watch this. I'm actually going to point to the edge and move this right there. You ready? We have to take the tax from the previous bracket. That's this VLOOKUP right there, 5. Plus, and I'm going to use round. And I need to, in parentheses, because I have to force subtraction, I'm going to take that amount and subtract the amount from the previous bracket. That was in the second column, so I click on VLOOKUP 2. Notice right here I have to close parentheses. I had to force that subtraction before our multiplication. So then we're going to multiply, and then we have the tax rate, which is in VLOOKUP 4 column, so I click there. All of that is sitting inside of round. So now I comma and 2 if it's to the penny, 0 if it's to the dollar. I'm going to put to the penny, close parentheses, and Control Enter. You got to be kidding me. That's a lot of VLOOKUPs with taxes to calculate total tax. This is actually total tax. Now I can come up here and put whatever amount, 4,890.12 cents, and instantly there is the total tax owed. All right, I'm going to Control Z to leave that amount there. That was example 9. Let's go look at one last lookup formula, and I'm going to click on E10. Let's close the clipboard. And before we even look at this new lookup formula, let's just describe our goal and do it the long way first, and then we'll see a much shorter way to do it. Here's our goal. We have transactions. We have a big data set with the date and the number of rolls of fences that we sold. Our goal is to calculate the price for each. And look at this. Here's our lookup table. If you have more units, your price will be lower. So we're going to look up the price, then we're going to multiply number of rolls times price, get the revenue, and then over here we're going to add that column. Now this is an approximate match lookup. And instead of using VLOOKUP, I'm going to teach you about lookup function. Now equals lookup. This is actually the original lookup function before VLOOKUP for vertical and HLOOKUP for horizontal lookup were even invented. Now this function did a bunch of amazing things. We're going to use the second argument. We need a lookup value, and an array. So lookup value, well, it only does approximate match lookup. In the old days, if you ever wanted to do exact match, you would have to sort the column, the first column of lookup table. But for us, that's not a drawback. Lookup is fine because we are doing approximate match. Now, comma, there's the array. And lookup can do either vertical or horizontal lookup. And we're going to highlight this table. And the way that lookup knows whether it's doing vertical or horizontal is if you have more rows or the same rows as there are columns, it does vertical lookup. If there were more columns than there were rows, it would do horizontal lookup. Now I'm going to lock this with the F4 key. And now notice we only have two arguments. There's the lookup value, and there's the lookup table. How does it know which column to retrieve? Well, it's easy. It always retrieves from the last one. So actually, a trick for making your formula shorter when you have approximate match is to use lookup. But there it is. It'll work exactly the same as approximate match VLOOKUP. If I double click and send it down, and I'm going to control down arrow to go to the last cell and then hit F2, that formula is looking fine. Now, if our goal is to calculate total revenue, I can simply say, hey, the price we just looked up times the number of rows, control enter, double click and send it down. Control down arrow, F2. That's looking good. Control up arrow. Now we come over here and our goal is to add. So I use the keyboard Alt equals. I click in the top cell to highlight all the way down. Now I use Control Shift and down arrow. Now I use Control Backspace to jump back to the active cell. And when I hit Enter, and there it is, $11,852,436. Now that was our goal. But what if we were not allowed to have these columns? Then somehow over in this cell, we would have to simulate this price column. We'd have to simultaneously, in the formula, look up every single number of rows in this table and then deliver every single price. Then we'd have to multiply it times all of the number of rows and then add them. The first trick to this is, and actually for this example, we're going to use SUMPRODUCT, which will do the multiplying and then adding of the two, in essence, helper columns. But the lookup function is going to come to our rescue, because whereas we used lookup here to look up a single item, another amazing feature of the lookup function is it can look up multiple items simultaneously. So watch this. I'm going to come over to this cell, and I need to simulate that price column. So equals lookup. And by the way, lookup value here, if you try to do a similar type of what's called a function argument array operation, which means looking up a bunch of items simultaneously, if you tried to do it with VLOOKUP, it would not work. But lookup has no problem. So lookup value, I'm going to highlight all the rows, all the number of rows. Control Shift down arrow, Control Backspace to jump back to the active cell, comma, and then I simply give it the array. Close parentheses, and watch this. You're not going to believe this. When I hit the F9 key to evaluate it, it simulated that whole helper column. Control Z. Well, how did I go about getting the total revenue in this column? Well, I took all the prices, which I have here, and I multiplied them times all the number of rows. Well, I'm going to use a second function, SUMPRODUCT. SUMPRODUCT is great because it can take an array or ranges of values, multiply them, then add them. Now, they have to be the same dimension, which they are. Array 1, that's simultaneously looking up every price, comma. Array 2, I simply highlight number of rows. Control Shift down arrow, Control Backspace, and SUMPRODUCT will do the trick. When I hit Enter, that is amazing. That is quite an amazing lookup formula. All right, that was a pretty epic lookup video. We saw in this last example how to use lookup. We actually saw how to use lookup over here. But then we saw how to use lookup to simultaneously look up multiple prices, multiply it times the number of rows with SUMPRODUCT, and get total. Back here on 9, we saw an amazing series of lookup functions to do a tax problem. Back in example 8, we saw how to use VLOOKUP and choose together to look up from multiple tables. Back in example 7, we saw how to use index and match to look up the min bid value and get the vendor's name. Then back on example 6, we saw how to look up left using index and match. Example 5, we saw the ever important match function for comparing two lists. Back here on example 4, we saw how to use VLOOKUP and match together to automatically get a column index number or relative position using the match for VLOOKUP. Example 3, we saw how to use VLOOKUP and mix cell references with column reference numbers above the cells with our formulas. Back in example 2, we talked about how to use left search and mid, even though we had a data mismatch, to get our lookup values, and then use VLOOKUP to look up price. And finally, we started this all off by building an invoice where we used if, ISBLANK, and VLOOKUP. All right, that's the first video in the series. There'll be one more, and that video will be all about pivot tables. All right, we'll see you next video.